The pie was still warm when Grace Delaney set her phone down next to my plate, pressed play on a voicemail and let me listen to her dead husband's voice. "Gracie, it's me. Don't react, don't call anyone, and whatever you do, don't touch the money yet. I'll explain when it's time. You always did trust me. Keep doing that." Time-stamped 11:52 p.m. Last night, 14 months after Tom Delaney's funeral, she watched me listen to it twice. This composed, silver-blonde woman in a cardigan, in her warm yellow kitchen with the good dishes out, and then she folded her hands and said the sentence she had clearly rehearsed all day, maybe all week. "Sam, you spent 21 years catching insurance liars. I need you to tell me if I'm going insane, or if I've spent a year grieving a man who is currently checking his voicemail. Let me back up 90 minutes, because you need to understand how strange this dinner already was before the pie. Grace and I have been neighbors for 6 years and widowed for a combined 3.5, her husband Tom 14 months ago, a boating accident on Lake Varick in an October storm, body never recovered. My Ellen 2 years before that, the slow way, the hospital way. Grief made us nodding acquaintances into something gentler. I fixed her gate. She left soup on my porch. We stood at our mailboxes some evenings talking about nothing, with the particular ease of two people who don't have to explain the empty half of their houses to each other. In 6 years, I had never once been past her front hall. Then Thursday at the mailboxes, not quite meeting my eyes, she said, "Sam, would you stay for dinner tomorrow? I need a person. You're the only one I can think of who'd understand the kind of help I need." I said yes before she finished. I'd been saying yes to that invitation in my head for about a year, if I'm honest, which matters to this story, so I'm telling you now. Dinner itself was lovely and wrong. Lovely. Pot roast, candles, her laughing at my one good joke. Wrong. She checked the window latch twice. Wrong. The front door had a new deadbolt, brass bright against an old door. Wrong. When a car slowed on the street outside, her fork stopped moving until it passed. I spent 21 years across kitchen tables from people carrying secrets. It was my actual job. Special investigations, Cascade Mutual, claims that didn't smell right. And by the salad, I knew Grace Delaney wasn't a lonely widow working up to a confession of feelings. She was a frightened woman conducting an interview. And by dessert, I'd apparently passed. So the voicemail. Me, holding her phone, pie untouched, the candles doing their soft work on a scene that had just changed genres. "Play it again," I said, and listened a third time. Not to the words, to the room around the words. Low hum underneath, rhythmic. A gull, faint, at the end. Rope clank, unmistakable if you've spent time on docks. Halyards on masts. "He's near a marina," I said. "Boats in the background. And he's calm. Grace, that's not a man in trouble reaching out. That's a man managing you. Don't touch the money yet. That's an instruction to an asset." "I know," she said quietly. I heard it too. That's the voice he used with contractors. And then Grace Delaney reached under the table, into a canvas bag that had been sitting by her chair all through dinner. She'd staged this, bless her, courses and all, and began laying things on the tablecloth between the candlesticks, one by one, like exhibits. Exhibit 1. A printed photograph, a stranger's vacation snapshot from a harbor town 400 miles north, pulled off a public hiking group's page. Happy couple in front, sailboats behind. And in the background margin, slightly blurred, turned 3/4 away, a lean, gray-bearded man on a dock, coiling line. "Tom shaved every day of his life," Grace said. "But I was married to that posture for 31 years. I've watched him coil rope 1,000 times. Sam, look at the elbow. Look at the stance. The photo's upload date 3 weeks ago. Exhibit 2, a house key, hers, that she'd found in March on the kitchen windowsill, when she kept her spare buried in a jar by the greenhouse. Exhibit 3, a list, in her careful handwriting dated across a year Feb study chair. Moved, Feb cologne smell upstairs, threw out his bottles in Nove, smelled it anyway. Aper, passport missing from safe. Aper $200 gone from the emergency envelope. June, garage side door unlocked twice. Sept file box in crawl space disturbed. 14 months of small wrongnesses, each one explainable alone. Grief brain, they call it. She'd called it that herself. She'd let her own daughter call it that. She'd half-scheduled a cognitive screening she never went to. "I thought I was haunting myself," she said. "Widows do. You misplace things, You smell him everywhere, you want the ghost. Sam, that's the horrible part. Some mornings I'd find something moved and feel grateful. Her voice stayed level, and her hands did not. Then last night the ghost left a voicemail with a callback number, and I stopped being grateful and started being furious, and this morning I invited you to dinner. In that order. I looked at the table, the photo, the key, the year of wrongness in her tidy hand, the phone with its 30 seconds of dead man, and did the thing I'd done 1,000 times across 1,000 kitchen tables, which is say the true thing plainly, because frightened people deserve verbs. Grace, I don't think you're insane. I think Tom staged his death 14 months ago. I think he's been entering this house at night ever since, and I think that voicemail means whatever he's been waiting for is finally about to happen. I turned the phone face down. And I think the most dangerous thing in your life right now isn't that your husband is alive, it's that word, yet. Don't touch the money yet. Grace, what money? That's when the house phone rang. The landline, 10:15 at night, and both of us went still as the furniture. Grace looked at me. I nodded. She picked it up on the fourth ring and said hello. Silence on the line. Not empty silence. Textured silence. A low hum. A gull. Then a click. And the dial tone. And Grace set the receiver down with 2 hands and said, "He knows you're here." We didn't sleep that night. We worked, at her dining table, with the curtains drawn, and what came out of Tom Delaney's file boxes over the next 4 hours rearranged everything I thought I understood about the quiet man who used to wave at me over the fence. The money first. 14 months ago, Cascade Mutual, my old company, and hold that thought, it matters twice, had paid out Tom's life insurance. $750,000, standard policy, standard beneficiary, Grace. And here is the fact that would eventually save her life, so mark it. She had never spent $1 of it. Not one. It sat in the payout account untouched, 14 months, while she lived on her teacher's pension. It felt like blood money, and I didn't know whose blood, she said. Everyone told me to invest it. My own daughter sent me articles. I just couldn't make my hands do it. Instinct is underrated. Her hands had known for a year what her mind found out on Thursday. Then, close to 2 a.m., in a file box marked House, Refinance, I found the thing Tom had actually been waiting for. A second policy, different carrier, Meridian Assurance, written 18 months before the accident. Accidental death. $2 million. And on the application, on the disclosure forms, on the beneficiary designation, in ink, Grace L. Delaney. Her signature, her real one, or close enough to survive a courtroom. I never, she started, and then stopped, and I watched 14 months of memory resort itself behind her eyes. The refinance. Spring before he died, he brought home a folder. Sign here, initial here. Gracie, it's all the same boilerplate. 40 pages, little yellow flags. I signed at the kitchen table while he made dinner. She looked up at me. I signed my own frame job between the salad and the pot roast, didn't I? That's the architecture, I said, and laid it out the way I'd lay out a case for a jury, because she deserved to see the whole machine at once. Policy 1 pays fast and clean. That's the seed money he's been waiting on, parked in your account, which is why don't touch it yet. Policy 2 is the real score. 2 million, but accidental death claims with no body get slow-walked, investigated, contested. Unless the widow patiently waits out the process. And Grace, the claim window on that policy runs 2 years, which means the clock he's been living on has a date. I found it in the Meridian paperwork in about 4 minutes. Final documentation deadline for the pending claim, after which it lapses unpaid. The 14th, 9 days away. He needs my signature on the final release, Grace said slowly. He needs me to file, and if I won't, then the whole 14-month project dies worthless. Which means sometime in the next 9 days, one way or another, Tom Delaney has to come collect his widow's cooperation. I didn't soften it, because the kitchen table rule is verbs. And the vice he built is this. Every document in this scheme wears your handwriting. The payout sits in your account. If this surfaces wrong, if you walk into a police station tomorrow with a ghost story and a voicemail, the on-paper version says Grace Delaney, mastermind, and the man who actually built it is a dead man with no fingerprints in the file at all. You can't subpoena a corpse, Grace. Dead men don't get alibis, and they don't need them. That's the whole genius of it. He didn't just fake his death. He laundered himself through his own funeral. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I mourned him with casseroles, Sam. Half this town cried in my living room. He watched me do it. The chair, the cologne. He was in the house. He watched me grieve him, and he took the $200 out of the emergency envelope while I slept. Her voice didn't rise. It lowered, which was worse. I want you to understand something before we go one step further. I'm not doing this to get free of him. I'm doing this so that he gets to sit in a courtroom and watch me be alive. Whatever you're about to propose it to that woman. I'd been half in love with my neighbor for about a year, in the careful, unspoken way of people who've buried spouses and don't trust the ice anymore. Somewhere in that little speech, the half fell off. Also unspoken. There was work to do. The morning brought the answer to the question I'd fallen asleep chewing. How does a retired golf and garage guy like Tom Delaney design a two-carrier, two-stage, 14-month insurance fraud with a bodiless accident and a patsy widow? Answer: he doesn't. Amateurs improvise. This was composed. So at 8 a.m. I called D. Okafor, 20 years my file room ally at Cascade, now Senior Records, owes me nothing, would fight a bear for me anyway, and had her pull the claim file on Tom's accident. The original one. The October storm, the capsized boat found drifting, the lake that doesn't give bodies back. One eyewitness had anchored the whole thing. A fisherman, statement taken at the scene, solid and detailed, saw the boat go over in the squall, saw a man in the water, lost him in the chop, called it in. Credible, consistent, gone by the time follow-up mattered, moved out of state. His name was Roy Hagan. I read that name and the back of my neck went cold, because I knew that name. I'd spent a career knowing that name. Kestrel Lake 9 years ago. A drowning claim I'd flagged as staged, dead certain and lost. The company settled over my written objection, and the losing had a face, and the face belonged to the helpful, detailed, unshakable eyewitness whose statement made the whole thing stick. Roy Hagan. Same man, same lake country, same role. 9 years apart, 2 drownings, 1 professional witness. Tom hadn't designed this. Tom had hired it. There was a playbook and an author, and the author had done this before, which meant somewhere out there was at least one other widow who'd signed her own frame at a kitchen table, and it also meant something operationally urgent. This crew had killed a claim investigator's career once already. Mine. They just didn't know their new Mark's dinner guest was the one adjuster in the state who'd read this script before. I was still on the porch with the phone in my hand when Grace stepped out beside me, coffee in each fist, following my stare down the street. Gray pickup, tinted glass, parked at the corner with its nose pointed at her house. Engine off. It had been there since 7. How long? She asked quietly. Has that truck been watching us? Grace, I said, taking my coffee, not looking away from the truck. I'd like to formally accept your invitation to be a person. Now smile at me like I'm charming, wave at nothing, and let's go back inside, because I need to tell you about a man named Roy Hagan, and you need to hear it away from windows. Inside, curtains drawn, I told her about Kestrel Lake, and watched her do the math I'd already done. Professional crew, prior success, 9 days on the clock, and a lookout on the street. And then, because the universe apparently felt the morning lacked punctuation, her cell phone buzzed on the table between us. Unknown number. A text. The neighbor goes home and stays home. He's a claims man, Gracie. Think. If this unravels, whose name is on everything? You want to explain to a jury why the widow's new boyfriend used to work for the insurance company? Get rid of him by tonight, or I make one anonymous call and introduce you both to the police as partners. T. Read the craftsmanship in that, the way I had to admire it even while it was aimed at us. In 4 sentences, he'd weaponized our friendship, previewed the prosecution's theory, and turned my 21 years of expertise, the one asset we had, into evidence against her. The widow and the adjuster. A jury would eat it with a spoon. He wasn't just watching the house. He was watching the story, editing it in real time, the way he'd edited his own death. He's frightened, I said. Grace looked at me over the phone. That's frightened. 14 months. He never contacted you once. Then I stay past dessert one night, and by morning, he's making threats on a traceable burner. Grace, he's 9 days from the deadline, his lookout just got made, and the Mark's kitchen has an adjuster in it. Everything about this text is a man improvising, and improvising men make the mistakes that patient men don't. I slid the phone back to her. So we're going to help him improvise. Text him back. Tell him it worked. Tell him you're scared. Tell him I got clingy and you shut it down. And then tell him you want to talk terms. Terms. He spent 14 months assuming you'll either obey or panic. The one script he hasn't written is the one where his widow turns out to want paying. I tapped the Meridian file. $2 million, Grace. And every risk is yours. Your signature, your account, your prison exposure. Any rational accomplice would demand a cut. So become one. Greedy is believable. Greedy gets meetings. And a meeting, I said, is the only place a dead man can be arrested. She typed for a while. What she sent was better than my draft. Hers had 31 years of marriage in it, the private grammar of it, the exact ratio of fear and spite that would read as authentically Grace, to the one man alive who'd know, he's gone, you're welcome. Now let's talk about the fact that I've spent 14 months holding your money and my felony. You want my signature by the 14th? Signatures cost. Call me when you're ready to discuss my percentage. And Tom, you left the windowsill key. Sloppy. Your ghost act needed me stupid, and I'm done being the only one in this marriage doing her job. 11 minutes of silence. Then the phone rang. The burner. Live. And she put it on speaker with her finger on her lips, and for the first time I heard Tom Delaney in real time. Warm, unhurried, and wrong. A voice with all the human static filtered out. There she is, he said, and he sounded pleased. 14 months. I kept telling Roy, my wife's smarter than the plan needs her to be. We just have to wait for her to notice. Percentage, huh? Okay, Gracie. Okay. The 12th, 11 p.m., I'll text where. Bring the Meridian release signed. Bring the account transfer forms. Come alone, I'll know. And we'll talk numbers like grown-ups. A pause, and then the sentence that told me exactly who we were dealing with. And, sweetheart, I am sorry about the casseroles. If it helps, you cried beautifully. It was the best attended thing I ever did. Click. Grace stood very still, looking at the dead phone, and I want to tell you the truth about that moment instead of the movie version. She didn't crumble and she didn't rage. She picked up her coffee, drank the rest of it standing at the counter, set the mug in the sink and said, the 12th. That gives us 8 days to decide who catches him. Because Sam, we are not doing this alone, are we? That text he sent is right about one thing. You and I look terrible on paper. Which is how, that afternoon, we drove 2 towns over to a chain diner and sat in a corner booth across from the 2 people this story had been waiting for. Marianne Pruitt, Meridian Assurance's Special Investigations Chief, a woman I knew by reputation the way infantry knows artillery, and, 40 minutes later, once Pruitt had seen the file and made a call with her jaw set, Detective Renata Cho, County Financial Crimes. I'll compress 2 hours of professional caution into its spine. Pruitt believed us fast. A nobody drowning with a Roy Hagen statement, God, I've been waiting for that name to resurface since I read the Kestrel file. But Cho laid out the legal razor Grace was walking, and she didn't soften it either, and I respected her for it. On paper, Grace was exposed. The signatures were hers, the account was hers. Cooperation was her shield, but cooperation had to produce Tom, physically, provably, saying incriminating things, taking an overt act toward the money. A voicemail and a blurry doc photo gets me a raised eyebrow, Cho said. A recorded meeting where a legally dead man negotiates his cut of a fraud he designed, that gets me everything, including the DA falling over herself to call your client a hero. So, Mrs. Delaney. She looked at Grace with the flat kindness of someone offering a person a parachute and a cliff in the same gesture. He said come alone, and he'll be watching for exactly this conversation. Are you genuinely willing to walk into a night meeting wearing a wire and perform greed for a man who has been rehearsing you for 31 years? And Grace Delaney, retired third-grade teacher's opposite number. Grace taught high school chemistry for 3 decades, and it showed right then, folded her hands on the diner table and said, Detective, last October I picked out his casket. There was a sale. I upgraded the lining because I loved him. He has seen my worst day, and it was fake. She pushed the Meridian release across the table. I'll wear the wire. I'll sign his forms. I'll count his money out loud if it keeps him talking. There is nothing that man can do to me in a boatyard at midnight that compares to what he already did to me in a church at noon. The 12th, let's rehearse. The 8 days before the 12th were the strangest of my life, and I've buried a wife, so I don't grade on a curve. Strange because of the double life. By day, Grace and I rehearsed with Cho's people in a borrowed conference room. Script trees, safety phrases, the choreography of the handoff, how to angle her body so the buttonhole camera kept his face. By night, we had to perform normal for the gray truck, which had been joined, we now knew, by a second watcher on the lake road. So we performed it. Mailbox chats, me mowing her strip of lawn, and, because Cho's surveillance team pointed out that Tom's text had objected to me, and a sudden total absence of me would read as compliance too perfect, one carefully staged porch argument, visible from the corner, where Grace waved her arms and I walked home stiff-necked like a man dismissed. She texted me after, "You slammed my gate. Method actor." I texted back, "You threw a dish towel at a federal cooperating witness." Her reply, which I have not deleted and will not stay for dinner Friday, "Curtains closed. Real one this time. And strange because of the fourth night." I have to tell you about the fourth night. Cho's tech team had seeded the house with cameras on day one, doorways, the garage, and one covering the crawlspace hatch. Because of that September entry in Grace's list, file box in crawlspace disturbed. At 2:41 a.m. on the fourth night, my phone lit up on the nightstand with a motion alert, and I sat up in my own dark bedroom 2 doors down and watched, live, in gray-green infrared, as the crawlspace hatch in Grace Delaney's laundry room lifted from below. He came up out of his own house's foundation, like something the ground was returning. 14 months I'd been told this was happening, and some part of me had still filed it as theory, and now here was Tom Delaney in a watch cap, moving through his widow's laundry room with the unhurried confidence of a man in his own home, because that is exactly what he believed it still was. He went to the kitchen, he drank a glass of water at the sink and rinsed the glass and put it back. And that detail has never left me, the housekeeping of it, the 14 months of undetectable courtesy. Then he lifted a floor panel under the pantry shelving that appeared on none of our diagrams, pulled out a duffel, later inventory, 19,000 in cash, 2 burner phones, a passport and a name that would take Cho's people a week to unravel, checked its contents, and took the whole thing back down through the crawlspace with him. 11 minutes, door to door. Under it all, 1 floor up, Grace slept, because Cho had gamed this exact scenario on day 1 and given us the hardest instruction of the entire operation. If he enters before the 12th, nobody moves. An intrusion arrest gets us burglary of his own house and a story with no fraud in it. The sting gets us everything. So nobody moved. I sat on the edge of my bed with my phone in both hands and watched a predator walk through the house of the woman I loved. And I let him, and it was the correct call. And I wanted on the record that correct and bearable are different words. I told Grace over coffee at 7. I told her all of it, the glass, the floor panel, the 11 minutes, because the kitchen table rule cuts both ways, and she'd earned every verb. She listened the whole way through without moving. Then she said, "He rinsed the glass," in a voice I hadn't heard from her before, flat as lake ice, and stood and went to the pantry and looked at the floor panel she'd stood on 10,000 times and said, "Sam, when your people arrest him, I want the charge sheet to include every night. I've been keeping a list of the wrongnesses for a year. Tell Cho I want my list in the file. He doesn't get to have been a ghost. Ghosts are innocent. He was a trespasser, and I want it counted." It was counted. It's counts 11 through 19. She framed the charge sheet. I am not joking. It hangs in the hallway, and when people ask, she says it's a family document. Strange, mostly, because of those dinners. 3 of them, over 8 days, cooked together in a house we both knew was under hostile observation. Curtains drawn, voices low, and somewhere between chopping onions and setting the table, something happened that 14 months of mailbox conversations had been too polite to allow. We talked about Ellen, we talked about Tom, the real one, or the one she'd thought was real, and what it does to your spine when your whole past tense turns out to be forged. "Here's what I can't get anyone to understand," she said, the second night, handing me plates. "I don't get to be a widow anymore, Sam. That was a true thing I earned it the worst way, and he stole it retroactively. You can't divorce a dead man. You can only be haunted by one. The 12th isn't revenge." She lit the candles, both of them, deliberately. "It's an exorcism. The night of the 12th, the location came by text at 9:40. Of course it did. He'd said 11 p.m. at a boat launch, and at 9:40 the burner buzzed, "Change. Hagen's Storage, Row C, Unit 114, 11 sharp." The launch was for anyone listening. Cho's team, to their enormous credit, had planned for exactly this. Improvisers always call an audible, it makes them feel like the smartest one moving, and had spent 2 days quietly pre-wiring the 3 most likely fallbacks. Hagen's Storage, owned, we now knew, by a Hagen Cousins LLC, was fallback number 1. When the text came, Cho just nodded at her tablet and said, "He picked our favorite. Positions." I need you to see it. A storage yard at the edge of town, sodium lights buzzing orange, rows of roll doors like shut mouths, one woman in a wool coat walking down row C with a folder of signed releases in her bag and a transmitter in her top button, while in a van 200 yards out, a detective, an insurance investigator, and a retired claims adjuster who could not make his hands stay still, watched her go. Cho had flatly refused to let me closer. She was right. I hated it with my whole body. Roy Hagen appeared first, stepped out of the shadows by Unit 110, wanded her with a detector Cho's tech had promised us was 8 years obsolete, checked her bag, took her phone, nodded at the dark. And then the roll door of 114 came up from inside, and in the orange light, lean and gray-bearded and alive, stood the man half this town had wept for. "You look good, Gracie," said Tom Delaney. "Widowhood agrees with you. I won't give you all 40 minutes. The case file runs 90 pages, and the tape is the greatest hits of a man who could not stop composing." He walked her through it, proudly, correcting her on details like a docent, how he'd studied the lake. No recovery in that basin since '74. I checked 40 years of records. How the refinance folder was Hagen's idea, but the yellow flags were his. You always signed at the flags. 30 years, you never read one page. Sweetheart, I counted on you. How he'd come into the house nights. "You sleep like the dead now, Gracie, you never used to." Every sentence another year off his eventual release date. Every sentence recorded twice and filmed once. He counted her percentage out loud. He watched her sign the last release with her own pen and told her she was finally being smart. And then he reached for the folder and Grace put her hand flat on it, and in the silence of that storage row, on tape, in the orange light, she said the line, "One correction first, Tom. For the record." She lifted her hand off the folder and looked at him, the way she must have looked at 10,000 teenagers who thought they'd gotten away with something. "I'm not your widow anymore, I'm your witness." He understood 1 second before the yard lit up. Just one. "I've watched the footage more times than I'll admit, and you can see it land, the whole architecture folding at once behind his eyes. And then row C went white with takedown lights, and Tom Delaney, being a composer to the end, ran. Made it exactly as far as the fence behind row D, where a detective who'd been standing in the dark for 3 hours introduced herself, and the last free act of the late Tom Delaney's life was getting his pocket square muddy in a storage yard owned by his accomplice's cousin. Hagen never even ran. Professional witnesses know when a claim's been denied. The aftermath. Quickly, because the machinery of it is almost funny, it turns out our systems genuinely struggle to arraign a dead man. Tom had to be legally resurrected before he could be prosecuted. A court order vacating his own death certificate, which his attorney had to request, which meant his first legal filing back among the living was a formal motion admitting he was alive. He drew 9 years, fraud, forgery, the burglaries of his own house, with more pending in the Kestrel Lake matter, because Roy Hagen, facing his second lake and a pattern charge, flipped in 6 days and gave up 3 prior jobs, which means somewhere out there, 2 other widows got phone calls last spring that ended a very long haunting. Meridian never paid a cent, sent Pruitt a bonus, and, this is my favorite paragraph in any document I've ever read, formally cleared Grace with a letter citing the claimant's 14 months of demonstrated non-participation, which is insurance speak for her hands knew. The untouched $750,000 went back to Cascade, every dollar, and Grace said watching that wire transfer leave felt like the casket finally closing. And the town? The town got the story wrong in our favor, which is the only way towns ever get stories. The version at the diner is that the quiet widow on Linden Street caught her own husband with the help of that insurance fella she's been feeding, and neither of us has ever corrected a word of it. Which leaves the last dinner. You knew there'd be a last dinner. The title promised you. It was 5 months later, April, the first evening warm enough to prop the kitchen door open, and this time the invitation came at the mailboxes with her eyes steady on mine. Stay for dinner Friday. No exhibits this time. No canvas bag. And I said what I'd said the first time, before she finished the sentence, because some men are trainable. She made the pot roast again. I'm overwriting the file, she said, chemistry teacher to the end, and we ate with the curtains open, which I understood was the point, both of us half noticing the street out of year-old habit, and then catching each other doing it and laughing. No gray truck, no lookout. Just Linden Street with its sprinklers going and somebody's radio, the enormous luxury of an evening that wasn't evidence of anything. And at dessert, pie again, still warm again, the table where she'd once laid out a year of hauntings like a losing hand. Grace Delaney set something down next to my plate. A key. Brass bright. Cut that weak front door, she said. The new deadbolt. I had them make two. She folded her hands and she was nervous and she was smiling, and she took a breath like a woman about to walk down row C. 14 months. A man came into this house in the dark, and I called it grief, because that was easier than the truth. I'm done with people entering my life sideways, Sam. If you're going to be in it, and I'd like that a great deal, you come through the front, in daylight, with your own key, where the whole street can see you. She nudged it an inch closer. You once told me frightened people deserve verbs. Well, here's mine. Stay. I've been asked, telling this story, what I said back. The honest answer is that for a while I didn't manage words at all. Two widowed people at a kitchen table is a lot of ghosts to speak in front of, and mine and hers both got a moment of silence they'd earned. But I took the key. I took the key before she finished the sentence. She noticed. Of course she noticed. You always say yes at the flags, she said, wicked as anything. And that is how I learned that Grace Delaney had decided I was worth teasing about the case, which is how I knew we were going to be fine. So, by dessert, nothing was the same. It was better. It has kept on being better. I mow the strip of lawn without being asked. She leaves the porch light on when I'm late, and on the anniversary of the 12th we drove out to the lake. The actual lake. Varick. Gray and glittering and innocent of everything done in its name. And she stood at the rail for a while and then said, "Thank you for coming to dinner." And I said, "Thank you for the pie." And that was the whole ceremony. And it was enough. Before you go, 2 questions, and I want your real answers in the comments, because if this channel has taught me anything, it's that half of you are carrying a version of this story yourselves. First, put yourself at that table. The pie is warm, the phone is playing, and it's your person's voice. The one you buried, the one you mourned, the one you rebuilt your whole life around losing. Honestly now, is your very first feeling relief or rage? Don't answer fast. Sit with it the way Grace had to. And second, the one I really want. Have you ever grieved something that turned out to be a lie? Not just a death, a marriage that was never what you thought, a friendship, a family story everyone swore by, a version of a person you mourned before finding out it never existed. What was the lie? How did it finally surface? And here's the real question. When the truth came out, did you get your exorcism, or are you still haunted? Tell me below. I read every single comment, and somewhere in this comment section is a person one warm pie away from finding out, and your story might be the thing that makes them brave. Subscribe if this one stayed with you, because next week I'm telling you about the anniversary card that arrived at my door in my late wife's handwriting, mailed 2 years after her funeral, postmarked from a town 400 miles north, and the florist who swears a woman matching her description orders lilies there every October.